Hi, everybody. This is Slava Kurilak. I am the founder CEO at Produve, and I am super excited for you to join us at another live stream event where we discuss how executives, entrepreneurs, and decision makers can leverage AI technologies. This live stream is being broadcast on multiple channels. So whether you're watching from LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, VK, OK, and Periscope and other platforms, it's really up to you to decide what is the best medium of consumption for you. You are joining us as a live listener, and so I encourage everyone to ask questions, leave comments, and I am more than happy to give you a glimpse of some of the best ways to use AI technologies to solve food and beverage problems. This live stream is meant to educate. This live stream is meant to inspire. This live stream is meant to give insight to anyone interested to use AI technology to solve real problems. I want to thank you for joining us. This live stream is being live streamed, and it will be available for offline viewing at anyone's convenience. So feel free to jump in, ask questions, and feel free to play this video back at a later time. I welcome everyone who's joining us, our future viewers and listeners, our current viewers and listeners. I want to thank you for being here, and I would love to start diving deeper into this topic. Today, we're discussing food and AI. This is a topic that has been on my mind for some time, and we are approached by companies who are interested to use AI technologies, who are working in the food and beverage industries, and this opportunity is something that anyone is willing to face. So I would love to answer anyone's questions who's joining us. This is definitely live. I can see that we have comments coming in from LinkedIn. Yes, this is live. I definitely welcome you to this live stream. And again, to recap, we are discussing food and AI, and the bridge between them is not often clear. The technologies often are seen as a distant object to business folks and vice versa. And so this live stream is meant to bridge the gap between the two. And it looks like we have a few questions coming in from LinkedIn. This event is aiming to discuss specifically food, but we can definitely talk about agriculture. This is an industry that's very similarly related, and how that bridge sort of occurs is when you have the necessity to produce more, to produce higher quality foods. And so if you're optimizing for agriculture, you're also helping the food industry in general. So definitely something that we can discuss further. If you have any specific questions about agriculture, we can dive deeper into this topic. So what's the context? Where are we today? The Earth's population is increasing, and because of that, we are dealing with an increase amount of food demand. This demand is placed globally. Due to COVID-19, this demand became something that was a necessity. Travel was impacted, but food demand was always there. Food demand will always be there. During COVID, during the year of 2020, we saw food delivery delays across different countries around the world, and this is because people were told to stay at home. This is because people were told to really work on, or rather do their best to time their consumer habits changed. I want to actually bring up the chats on the side, and everyone will be able to see what's happening here. We do have a comment from Rael. Hi, Slava. Thank you for joining us, Rael. I really appreciate it. We are live. This is being broadcast to multiple social media platforms. This is recorded live stream, so feel free to watch it at a later time. So to come back to where we are, live streaming is just allowing us to engage with each other better. And to come back to the context of the COVID-19, everyone's habits changed. Everyone was told to sort of focus on creating a sort of adapting the best way that they could, and these adaptations were necessary because of COVID-19. Definitely logistics has been an issue for many individuals globally. Logistics is the nature of how do we deal with transportation, how do we deal with management, how do we deal with the transparency of the food industry supply chain. And logistics is a big issue that must be solved, right? AI technology is one potential way to do that. And how we saw this play out during 2020 was that companies that were relying on supervised learning techniques to predict their food demand were actually unable to adjust to the new circumstance, the new world of normal, which was due to COVID-19. And so what happened was you had companies who were committing to a specific set of AI technologies, primarily supervised learning, where you had trained systems to create labeled data sets. And when COVID hit, it really took a lot of companies by surprise. They were unable to adapt despite having years of data, despite having built AI systems or machine learning models, often called. And what we saw at the end of COVID, at the end of 2020, was that we had new ways of thinking, new strategies to deal with dynamically changing marketplaces. We had new technologies that would be able to step up, and I'm more than happy to dive deeper into the specific issue that is possible. So we definitely have too many companies using legacy software. I concur, and I'm very well in agreement with this particular comment. The legacy software is simply built on the fact that you needed to use one piece of software to do everything, right? So think of it like the monopoly of all software, and companies were relying on these monopolies to sustain their business, and because of that, they were actually unable to adjust to the changes that were happening in real time. And so the first issue that we see during COVID-20 was that you had issues with the technological choices. So supervised learning is the example I gave so far. But the other very important point to mention is that a lot of companies were using legacy software, and legacy software meaning outdated software or software that was bloated, software that was incompetent to do everything. This software was not helping individuals to move forward. So I definitely think that legacy software is one of these sort of massive realizations that people came to, especially during COVID. And so what happened? What happened when legacy software was unable to adjust? What happened when supervised learning models were unable to showcase sort of the reality of the marketplace? Well, individuals, companies had to start to rethink their existing processes. They had to rethink what was being sort of the norm, what was a better way. And during this process of reflection, you had some companies to dive deeper into new ways of thinking, new ways of operating. I'll give you a few examples. In the food and beverage industry, and especially in the restaurant industry, a lot of traditional restaurants were affected by COVID-19, and this was because the restaurants were sort of doing everything, and at the same time, when COVID hit, they were unprepared for the circumstance where people could not either travel or do take-in or dine-in. And what happened was the traditional restaurants suffered in revenue, they suffered in losses, and what we saw was the emergence of new technology, new systems. I'll give you one example, that is ghost kitchen. Those who are not familiar, ghost kitchens is the concept of, similarly to headless commerce, where we're aiming to create a very specialized set of kitchen operations. In this case, the kitchen is only doing the preparation, meal cooking and meal sort of packaging, and the rest of the process, the delivery, is being handled by somebody else, by another company. A great example of that, if you are running a ghost kitchen, you're just preparing the meal, and a company like Uber, DoorDash, Skip the Dishes are doing the delivery. So it's critical that you start to specialize, and that's how you can better survive to the market conditions. So the legacy software that they were running on before no longer helped them, right? The concept of ghost kitchens meant that companies needed to specialize in the process of food making. And so we saw the emergence of technology that was driven by APIs or in application programming interfaces that sort of helped these individual companies to better adapt to COVID-19. And I'm definitely surprised, myself included, that a lot of companies are still thinking very traditionally, either thinking to operate on-premise or thinking to operate without sort of the idea that maybe there's another way, and that other way is going cloud. So the concept of being sort of cloud-driven, the concept of taking existing software and going to the cloud has been sort of in the wild before COVID-19. But what has COVID done was it has greatly accelerated that pace to how companies are moving forward, right? A lot of companies were forced to adapt, and a lot of companies went online, being digital, going into the cloud, using cloud services and products to operate their business. One of the trends that we see from a technology side is the concept of serverless, or sometimes referred to API-driven or event-driven. A lot of more modern technology sort of thinking companies decided to adapt by re-architecting themselves, going serverless, meaning operating without servers, using APIs to sort of readjust their architecture, and microservices. So a lot of these more modern technologies were able to adapt, but the legacy companies, the ones that were using legacy software, I want to be specific, they are still left behind. So lots of companies who are thinking cloud, and definitely companies are unable to take full advantage of AI. And I want to mention this as well. There are a few reasons for this at the moment. Companies who are just going through digital transformation now, they're not ready for AI. They are becoming data-driven, and that's a great starting point, but it takes more than just being data-driven. It takes more than just defining a data strategy. It takes more than just sort of collecting data to become AI-driven. And one of the prerequisites is to start to take care of that data, right? So one of the first questions I ask whenever a client comes to us and they're interested to use AI technology is, do you have labeled data sets? Do you have data that has been carefully reviewed, analyzed, and labeled, so that by the time you are interested to use AI technology, you have a good starting point? If you don't have labeled data sets, if you're not, for example, using the traditional supervised learning techniques to learn on that data, then you must take that time to do so. And so, becoming AI-driven is a process, but it must begin with the concept of being data-driven first. And the food data sets, as somebody mentioned on LinkedIn, is definitely something that individuals and companies need to start thinking about. Creating the data sets, finding data sets if they don't have it, being able to focus on the data set is absolutely critical if you are to start thinking outside of the traditional sort of ways of collecting data. You need data sets to apply some intelligence on top. This is where technologies like AI technologies come in. You need to have a data set for individuals or companies to work with. Ideally, that data set is private. That data set is something that is sort of created by and used by the company. And that data set also is the sort of the advantage that companies start to gain over their competitors. If you're creating a data set yourself, if that data set is something that you feel proud of, usually that's a good sign. Usually that's a sign of your competitiveness, right? The software you use is not your competitive advantage. The process you follow is not your competitive advantage. The data you have is your competitive advantage. So anyone who's thinking along the lines of how can I use data to differentiate myself is thinking along the right path and setting themselves up for success, setting themselves up for integration with AI software. So what happens if a company does not have private data, right? This is where individuals can go online. They can search for publicly available data sets, and these data sets have licensing attached to them. So please read the licensing agreements that you find online. And not all data sets are free to use for commercial purposes. Some data sets are public, yes, but they have specific licenses attached to them, only asking the individuals or companies to use the data sets for research purposes. So keep that in mind. If you are looking at publicly available data sets, it's critical for you to look at data sets that you can use for commercial purposes. That is sort of the starting point. Mind you, if you are a non-for-profit, feel free to use any data set as you wish, and your sort of motivation for using that data set changes as well. So again, I want to thank everyone who is joining us today. This event is meant to inspire, educate, and to share best practices for how individuals, entrepreneurs, and decision makers can solve food and beverage industry problems using AI technologies. It looks like we have quite a few comments coming in from LinkedIn. I want to thank our listeners, existing listeners and future listeners, for joining us. We definitely see that there are lots of different solutions in the marketplace, for AI technologies that anyone can use. This is the beauty of the space, that AI technology is being democratized. AI technologies are being more available than ever. In the last year alone, Amazon released at least half a dozen to dozen services focusing on helping individuals and companies to use AI as a service solution. So Amazon Web Services is the vendor I mentioned. Every other cloud provider is jumping in the same bandwagon, right? Microsoft, Baidu, Google, IBM, they're all thinking about how they can better create solutions for their customers. And so the best way to do that is to offer services. The best way to do that is to offer products. So I want to recap this as on a holistic level. Anyone who's interested to use AI technology does not need technical experience. They do not need development background. They do not need AI experience, but they do need the intention to use the technology. Your intention, your vision is by far the best thing you have. And so if you are thinking about using AI technology, you must just sort of let go of the premise that you must learn the technology. You just need a desire to use it. And today we have more services, more products, more opportunities than ever in the past to use the technology. And I want to showcase sort of two examples of the possible sort of ways to use AI technology, and then allow you to better sort of think about your specific use case. So the one example is, imagine you want to be involved in the AI development process itself, right? This is a context where some companies come to us and say, hey, Slava, hey, Prodube, can you help us to implement AI technology? And this is sort of the self-supervised path, right? We will guide you on that path, and we will make sure that you make less mistakes, but you will do the work, right? This is where you take on more risk. We guide you to minimize some of that risk. So this is sort of happy path one. The second path, and that's sort of the opposite side of the spectrum, is that we have some individuals come to us and they want to be fully hands-off. They want to use AI technology, but they don't want to develop it. They don't care too much about management. They don't care too much about upkeep. They don't care too much about making these systems better over time. And so in the second context, individuals come to us and they say, hey, Slava, can you and your team do the work and take care of all the process for us? And that way we will simply pay you for our time. And this is the context where we as an agency, as an AI agency, take on all of the risk, and our clients take minimal risk. And so I want to lay out this spectrum of clients because it's very important, right? You don't necessarily need to have an in-depth knowledge of the technology. You have a choice. Your choice is, how comfortable do you feel with risk? How comfortable do you feel with managing the system yourself, and depending on the answer, so that allows you to move forward better, right? If you're more comfortable with the technology, I highly encourage you to look at existing third-party solutions, existing third-party products. If you are less comfortable, I encourage you to have a discussion with myself and my team where we can guide you through the entire process, and you can simply be there for the ride. And again, this is great to sort of emphasize that, let's discuss the fact that food and beverage industry is quite diverse, right? We've briefly touched on agriculture. There's also the IoT side, meaning the industrial. The abbreviation is, I believe it's industry of. Oh, I'm blanking on the term IoT now. This is funny. Internet of Things. That's right. So Internet of Things is another very common sort of way of thinking about how you can go about improving the industry. So to recap, IoT is a technology. It's a tool that allows anyone to use software and hardware to better understand what's happening in the food industry, right? The agriculture is a perfect example of how you use IoT. IoT technology is simply allowing anyone to collect data, oftentimes in real time, collect data on the device itself, and then stream that data back to a central hub. So IoTs can be as simple as cameras installed in an agriculture facility. They can be more complex as something that analyzes the transportation of individuals, analyzes the transportation of vehicles. These systems can basically read with a variety of sensors what's happening in real time. So IoT are an amazing way that you can sort of dive deeper into AI space, because now you have the data lake, you have the data plume, the data warehouse, whatever you want to call it, that allows you to use AI technology. So anyone who's thinking of either becoming data-driven or IoT-driven is setting themselves up for success. They're setting themselves up for the integration of AI technologies. And today we see sort of a plethora of IoT devices that are now being released into the marketplace, and they already have AI technology. So the chips that are being sort of released into the marketplace already include machine learning models. They already include neural networks embedded into the hardware itself, and that allows anyone to do inference, classifications, or predictions in real time. And this is an amazing sort of opportunity, because it does not require individuals to go and train AI systems in the cloud. It does not require individuals to go and get trained on AI technology. It allows sort of the architects to envision a system of data collection, use IoT devices to collect that data, and then have the devices themselves perform advanced sort of calculations on the device itself. And that's like an amazing technology and a sort of a breakthrough for how the industry can evolve. So let's sort of reset where we are today. The food industry is growing, the population is increasing. And so what are some of the major goals that we face as society? Let's discuss at least three. Feel free to read a blog post that I wrote on food and AI technologies if you're interested to dive deeper into these specific ideas. But I'll mention three so that you can better understand sort of where we are today. So the first goal that humanity faces, and these goals are in alignment with the United Nations sort of goals of that are defined to help humanity live a better life. The first goal is achieving zero hunger, right? This is an altruistic goal. This is a goal that allows individuals and companies to create a better world where hunger is not something we think about. Hunger is something that hopefully no longer exists. So today we see this problem, especially in third world countries. First world countries have less and less of these issues, but we did see sort of food shortages. We did see logistic issues during COVID-19. So it is still fresh in our minds. And the question is, how can we achieve zero hunger? Well, how do we nourish 800 million plus people around the world who are hungry today? And the best way to do that is to use all parts of the food supply chain to and apply very specific technologies to help us to optimize these processes, right? So we need to analyze how we can improve the growing of food, the manufacturing of food, distribution, consumption, and all of this process must be optimized using AI technology. So how will AI technology help? We can, first of all, understand what's happening better in real time. And the second part is we can make better predictions about that future. So the first goal that we've mentioned so far is the idea of achieving zero hunger. The second, I would say, very high-level goal that we have as humanity is to respond to the food demand that is seen around the world, right? People want food, they need food, they need to feel like they have food available on demand. And so the distribution of food is very important, right? In a world where everything is becoming more global, in a world where everything is becoming more digital, we need to be able to create systems that allow individuals to order food on demand. And so in first world countries like Canada, where I'm from, United States, and in other parts of North America, we have this amazing ability to order food and have it delivered to us with a click of a button, right? If we go to other parts of the world, we don't have that yet, right? And so being able to achieve this like highly optimized routing of food, being able to achieve highly optimized system for food delivery is very important. And the first way to do that is to better understand what's happening in real time. The second best way to do that is to predict, where food needs to go, what's the quantity, and sort of what's the best way to get there. So that's two ideas. And the third idea is basically we need to make sure that we have a stable food supply. We need to make sure that our food supply is always constant, that we're not seeing shortages, that we're not seeing overstock of food. We need to make sure that our food is stocked so that we minimize waste, right? We saw issues like this during COVID. We saw issues of food waste. We saw issues of food shortages. And the way is we have to ask ourselves, how can we use AI technology to ensure stable food supply? Well, I'll share with you one idea, and again, I encourage everyone who's interested to read my blog post on the topic of food and AI technologies to learn better how you can apply the technology. And what I'll do now is I'll actually share the link for everyone to see, and hopefully that makes it easier for individuals to jump in and read the blog post. So the third way, as I mentioned, is to ensure a stable food supply. And the way that you can do that is to use two technologies. One is called generative models, and the second is called genetic programming. So generative models are models that are creating something that did not exist before, right? They're generating perhaps some piece of data. And genetic programming is the concept of you're training AI systems to evolve on its own. Similarly, how animals and humans evolved over time through the mutations of genes. We have the same technology available in the AI space, and you can use these technologies to explore how food conditions change, and what are the parameters necessary to ensure that we have a stable food supply. And the recommendation systems, prediction models, they're all part of this attempt to ensure that we have more stability in our food supply chain, and being able to predict what's happening, or at least rather what will happen next, is definitely one of the ways that we can do that. Okay, so great. So far we've briefly discussed three high-level goals of sort of what we have as humanity, right? The third being we're ensuring that the food supply is stable, we're responding to the global demand of foodstuff, and the first being we are ensuring that there is zero hunger. And it looks like we have a few more comments on our LinkedIn channel. Again, I want to thank everyone for who is listening and who is watching us. We're definitely thinking along the same lines. If we're thinking about how we can help humanity, then we must align ourselves to think like global agencies. We must align ourselves to think like United Nations. They do have a specific a goal or mission in mind. And if we are thinking along the same lines, that gives an indication that we're on the right track, right? Yes, companies can be very commercial. Yes, companies can think about the bottom line, how can they can generate more profit, how they can reduce costs, how they can save time. Those are very worthwhile goals to pursue. At the same time, if companies start to think bigger picture, if companies start to align themselves to global challenges, now they start to expand the impact of their business, right? And the impact is one of the questions that we usually discuss with individuals who have a conversation with us. We always ask, what is the impact of what it is that you seek to solve? And that's critical if you want to develop technology that is meaningful, if you want to develop technology that is impactful, right? Being able to predict the impact ahead of time is a stepping stone to making a better place, making a better world. So what are some of the other sort of comments we're noticing here is that, yes, we can definitely produce higher quality foods using AI technology. So let's actually break this down. So for anyone who's interested to learn how you can go about using AI technology to produce quality foods. So the first idea there is to actually detect food rottage or food sort of spillage, whatever terminology you use to describe it. If you can detect food when it's going bad, if you can detect it through different stages of the sort of the health cycle of the food, now you can act in time. Can you catch when food is going bad? Perhaps it's the opportunity to freeze the food. Can you catch when the food is shifting because of the environment it's in? These are the best ways you can sort of go about using the AI technology. And the way you do that, you use computer vision, you use deep learning models to be able to understand when the food color changes. You're using these systems to understand when there is certain discoloration, when there are certain spots, when the food sort of stuff is changing shape or form, and that's when you act. That's when you take action. So you now have technologies like computer vision and deep learning that are able to detect food going bad. So that's one idea of how you can improve that particular process. The second idea I want to mention here is that you can actually detect when is the best time to harvest food, right? Let's talk about the concept of apples, right? We have an apple tree, we have apple harvesting, but the question is, when do we harvest? Do we harvest based on what we've always done in the past? Or do we harvest based on what we know is happening in real time? What is the level of water that is sort of coming into the plantation? What is the level of light? What is the level of nutrients? All of these parameters are critical in figuring out if now is the best time to harvest food or not. So the second way you would go about increasing the food quality is to figure out when you harvest. And like I've mentioned, you use a variety of parameters. These are different techniques you can leverage. You can use everything from supervised learning to computer vision to natural language processing to understand when is the best time to do that. And so we do have more sort of comments on LinkedIn. Again, I'm super thankful for everyone who is listening to us and watching this live stream. I definitely want to address everyone's statements and questions here. So we can definitely create better outcomes with less data sets. I want to address this as well for those who are interested. Yes, we do have a necessity to create more data over time, to massage that data, to label that data, and to sort of create bigger data sets over time, but it's no longer a necessity. So I want to showcase a few technologies that are able to help make this a reality. So, 5-10 years ago, we needed to have millions of data points just to make sense of a particular solution. Today we need thousands or sometimes hundreds of data points to achieve the same thing. So what's happened, right? What happened in the last 5 to 10 years, and why has there been a drop of the number of data points necessary to create AI systems? The primarily reason for that is because we've seen the explosion of something called pre-trained models. So pre-trained machine learning or deep learning models has enabled anyone to save themselves time, save themselves money, and get started faster. So what happens, right? You have individuals and teams of people who are creating AI systems, and they're training these systems on general data. So for example, the AI teams, perhaps they're training these systems to better understand animals or to better understand the Wikipedia. And as soon as you have this foundational data sets, this pre-trained model, now you can extend it. Now you can come in and you can have a specialized data set. And now you can just say, well, I want to, for example, better detect apples. And I want to detect, for example, when apples of specific type are going bad. Now you just need hundreds or thousands of examples, and you take the pre-trained model and you take your newly sort of created or curated data set of apples, and you train your newly created data set of apples on the pre-trained model, right? And this is the beauty. You now can save yourself a lot of time and money because you have used a model that somebody else has done for you, and you've simply retrained it, or you taught it new tricks, right? You took an old dog and you taught the dog new tricks. And when you do this, you're able to save yourself a lot of effort, and you're able to create solutions that are now able to, for example, predict when apples are going bad. Now, this is amazing technology. It's readily available for anyone to use, right? If you're interested to learn and dive deeper into this field of pre-trained models, I encourage you to reach out, and I'm more than happy to give you specific examples and more than happy to share with you how that's possible. But to recap, pre-trained models has enabled anyone to create smaller data sets, and for that reason, these smaller data sets are now enabling individuals and companies to create AI-driven solutions. So sort of to come back to where we are for our social network, we're getting more comments and more sort of users joining us on LinkedIn, and it seems like there's definitely an alignment here, right? We have the intention to create a better solution. The question is, what technologies is allowing us to do that, right? AI technology is one technology, but it's not the only technology. Like, yes, I have a bias. I do want to disclose that. I have been in the AI space for the last 8 years, and I have seen how the technology has helped companies to use data. But there are other technologies, similar technologies, adjacent technologies, neighboring technologies, sort of up-and-coming technologies, which are very powerful and which are very important for anyone to consider. So the first technology that comes to mind, and it has already been mentioned by a LinkedIn watcher of ours, which is blockchain. So blockchain is an incredible technology. It's a technology that allows anyone to use certainty in the software process. So I'll break this down. What's the difference, right? People hear the terms AI, blockchain. Sometimes they're confusing. Sometimes they mean the same thing. But there are differences. So AI on one side is a technology that helps humanity deal with probability, right? Blockchain, on the other hand, is a technology that helps people use certainty, right? One is probability, one is certainty. And you need both, but there are limitations of each depending on what you do, right? AI technology is great for making predictions of the world, right? We're attaching prediction to everything we do. But we do need some certainty, right? We do need certainty around process, and that certainty can come from blockchain. This is one of the best ways to use blockchain. It's not because it's a brand new technology. It's not because it's a technology that everyone is talking about. It's not because of Bitcoin. It's because it gives us certainty, and that certainty allows us to gain more clarity, and that also allows us to sort of bring more transparency, right? So certainty gives us clarity, certainty gives us transparency. And sort of the best way you would go about using blockchain is you would apply it in the supply chain of food, right? So whether we're talking about agriculture, manufacturing, or the distribution of food, if you apply blockchain technologies during sort of in that process, we are creating a transparent process. Certainty means that we're tracking data that cannot be modified over time. And this is the certainty I'm referring to. Blockchain technologies were built so that it was sort of, think of it like read-only, or if you want to change it, you would append. Append means edit. So the only way you would want to modify blockchain technology is if you edit or you make a new link in the blockchain, right? And that's different than AI technology. AI technology is always changing. So if you store a model and you retrain it, that model is now looking at different probability space, and that space is dynamically changing. And this is the difference between certainty and probability, the difference between blockchain and technology. So AI technology allows anyone to attach an uncertainty, risk, or probability to what they do, whereas blockchain allows anyone to attach certainty or transparency into what they do. Okay, so we do have more comments on LinkedIn. I really appreciate everyone who's joining us today, and we are discussing food and AI technologies. Today is meant to bridge the gap between food and technology. And we've so far discussed pre-trained models, how they're saving individuals and companies time, but we do want to touch base on two of the most powerful technologies in AI, and these technologies are allowing individuals and companies to get the best use cases of the AI technology. So the first is computer vision, and the second is natural language processing, or NLP, right? So coming back to the first technology, computer vision is the idea that we can teach systems or computers to better understand the world using visual data, right? This is critical. How can we teach computers to look at images? How can we teach computers to understand video better? And we now have the tools to answer these questions. When you combine deep learning technologies with computer vision, today we see major breakthroughs in the AI space, right? So everything, like I've mentioned before, from knowing when food is going bad to knowing when is the best time to pick apples. These are just two examples, right? On the manufacturing floor, sort of the distribution floor, you can have cameras, videos that detect motion, that detect sort of patterns, and you can facilitate the entire process of distribution, manufacture, and the entire supply chain process using robotics, using video cameras. Imagine a facility that is fully autonomous, right? You have no people on the production floor, you just have machines, right? This is an incredible vision to achieve, and the only way to get there is to use computer vision and deep learning technologies. Now, if you combine it with robotics, right, an area of AI technology, you're now extending your capabilities, and you're now allowing people to stay at home, right? This is the vision that people really wanted to achieve, right? COVID impacted everyone's lives, and it told people to stay at home. But really what happened was COVID exposed a major weakness, which was that people were susceptible to viruses, and the susceptibility came from human-to-human interaction. So in the next generation of food and beverage industry, we have companies who are thinking, how can they achieve full autonomy? How can they use robots, robotics, artificial intelligence to automate everything and make sure that people are not exposed in that process? So, there was a scare during COVID-19, and that scare came from different myths that came around how COVID would spread from food and that would spread to people. But imagine a context where we have a fully automated sort of manufacturing, agriculture, distribution process, and there are no people in that process, right? If there are no people, well, now you can implement measures to make sure viruses are not spreading, right? Everything from advanced image analysis to make sure there is no viruses on the food products, all the way through just more rigorous testing, and it can be fully automated, right? So this is definitely a field of that's rapidly growing, and I want to emphasize that even though the technology is available, right? I've mentioned computer vision and deep learning technologies, it does not require people to start from beginning, right? You don't need to start from scratch. So the first idea so far I mentioned is using pre-trained models to save yourself time. But there's also another way. And that other way is to use automated machine learning. So this is something that one of our viewers and watchers has already suggested on LinkedIn, which is the idea of AutoML. AutoML is an amazing technology. This technology allows anyone to use, in a way, models that are doing hyperparameter optimization automatically. These systems are automatically figuring out what are the best features that the system must figure out in order to come up with the solution. And not only that, it's using pre-trained models and automated hyperparameter optimization. So when you have the models that are learning on previous examples of data, when you have models that are using its own mechanism to come up with the algorithm itself, when you have solutions that are more automated than they're not, then you have a new paradigm emerge. And this is the paradigm of AutoML, or automated machine learning. Automated machine learning is the holy grail of AI, right? People talk about artificial general intelligence. People talk about intelligence that is something that individuals hopefully will see sometime in the future. But today we're already see glimpses of artificial general intelligence, and it's found in the AutoML community. How amazing is it for a data scientist or machine learning practitioner to create a system that learns by itself? It uses very little data. It's able to come up with its own parameters. It's able to come up with its own predictions with little guidance, right? This is the holy grail of automated machine learning. And this is the second best way that you would go about using the existing architectures to solve problems. So the first being pre-trained models, and the second being you have a automated machine learning. Okay, so far we do have about 12 minutes left on this live stream. I want to touch base on one more technology that I see as sort of the most adapted technology in the AI space. And anyone who's in the food and beverage industry is definitely thinking about using this technology. And that is natural language processing. And I do also want to emphasize before I move forward with NLP is that AI technology, like any technology, is not just aiming to create a more sustainable sort of food supply or able to generate revenue for companies. It's also able to help people to not be infected by viruses, right? So coming back to the context of COVID-19, right? If we have a worldwide pandemic, if we have a context where individuals are afraid to go out, they're afraid to consume certain foods, well, this is where technology can help us. This is where technology can guide our thinking, can guide our processes to make sure we are not afraid, or we're not sort of diving into these sort of thought processes. So being able to detect viruses on food is definitely one of the best ways that I can see how you can use computer vision and deep learning technologies, right? So what is the limitation with the human eye, right? The human eye, we can only see about 30 frames per second. We know this because this is the frequency at which we watch movies with, right? Yes, we can play with 60 frames per second if we're playing video games. But at that point, we start to see basically blurry images, right? So, and the context is, we can see a certain amount of light with our own eyes, but we do have limitations, right? We are unable to see, for example, infrared. We cannot see heat. We cannot see cold. We cannot see radio frequency. We cannot see magnetic waves, right? We do see light waves, but that's it. Right? But computers, they can see so much more. And this is one of the best ways to use the technology. we can use the technology, we can gain additional insights by using cameras, for example, by using sensors, and all the sensor data can guide our process of making food better, right? Perhaps we can look at heat to detect if something is going bad. Perhaps we can look at infrared or sort of other types of radio frequencies to figure out if something is wrong with food. Maybe we can detect viruses or coronaviruses or other types of sort of bad actors on our food. So to come back to sort of the recap, yes, computer vision is by far the #1 best technology that anyone is using today to solve food problems. It's dealing with imagery, it's dealing with videos. This data is incredibly rich, it's incredibly diverse, and anyone who has the means to do that, they can do that. The second way to use AI technology is to solve NLP problems, or natural language processing. NLP is the context of asking the question, hey computer, can you tell me what is being said here? Can you tell me what's being written here? Can you analyze these words for me? Can you analyze this speech for me? Right, this is important because oftentimes we're not dealing with imagery and videos, we're dealing with text. Perhaps we're dealing with communication data, perhaps we're dealing with correspondence data, perhaps we're just dealing with audio data, perhaps we're dealing with machinery data. So all this data we can analyze, right? And NLP is how we go about that analysis. We can ask ourselves questions like, for example, what was the status update of a food delivery? And perhaps it was a check-in by phone. Perhaps it was a driver who called in a call center, called in a specific distribution line, and they reported using voice their status. Well, that process can now be transcribed. That process can be analyzed. That process can be made sense using NLP technologies, right? So one way to go about it is to analyze human-generated data. For example, what's the context of what was being said? But the other one that I think is also very important to understand is, we're generating all of these images and videos. We're generating a massive amount of data with respect to food. So for example, we're taking pictures of foods and we're putting those pictures online. And we also put a lot of this information on social media, right? So the easiest way to go about using NLP today is to look at social media, right? We have data already. We can just analyze what's being said on social media, right? We can scan that data, we can make sense of it, and we can create context to that data. So I'll give you a few examples. So far, I've given a few sort of high-level overview of the technology, of sort of the use cases, but I want to dive deeper because the examples allows you to dive deeper into the specific problem. So let's say you want to understand what's being said around the context of food pictures, right? Imagine you're a food company, you're creating food, you want to come up with, for example, with a new recipe. You create a new recipe, you put it online, and you want to know what is the response by the customers. Like, what do they say? Are they satisfied? Are they happy? Are they ecstatic? Are they sort of sharing the news of this new recipe? Perhaps it's a recipe of a new pizza. Perhaps it's a recipe that is something that is highly experimental. And if you're analyzing social media data, you can ask yourself, what is the sentiment of that food? And this is where we do something called sentiment analysis. This is one example of how you can go about using NLP. Sentiment analysis allows anyone to understand what is the positivity score of what's being said. Is the comment positive or negative, or is it neutral, right? So imagine somebody responds to a picture of food. They say, wow, this is the best pizza I've had in a while. I really look forward to buying more pizza like this in the future. This is a positive sentiment, and sentiment analysis models allow anyone to make these types of classifications. The second example is something called text classification. It's similar to sentiment analysis. So text classification models are allowing people to understand what is being said, not from the context of emotion or sentiment, but from the context of what does that word mean, right? So perhaps the person says, I love this pizza, right? And the words love is perhaps grouped into the specific category of, is it an adjective, is it a verb, is it a pronoun? And pizza is grouped into different types of categories, like is it a food source, is it a beverage, etc. So all of this data, everything can be analyzed using natural language processing. Social media today is by far the best source of data for any company to use to better understand what's happening. But anyone who's collecting data, audio data, video data, is already on their way to use NLP. So just keep that in mind, right? Like if you're working in the food and beverage industry, if you are recording data, if that data is related to speech, this is the perfect example. This is how you would go about using natural language processing. And the third example I want to share is the context of how anyone can ask questions and gain insights from the textual data. So imagine, for example, that we analyze social media and we are looking to see what was the response of a particular campaign of a particular pizza, right? Here, we're analyzing all of the conversations that people had, all of the comments, all of the likes, everything that was posted on social media. Now we're asking a question. For example, how many people found the pizza to be salty? Or what percentage of people love the pizza and what percentage of people hate the pizza, right? These specific questions is the third example, and that is question answer model, right? This is the third way you would go about using natural language processing to extract insights from the food and beverage industry. So far, I gave you 3 examples of NLP, right? The context of sentiment analysis, text classification, and the third being question answering. But I want to sort of zoom out a bit on a high level, discuss that, so far we've discussed a few technologies, including AI, supervised learning. We've discussed deep learning, computer vision, natural language processing. And all these technologies are simply tools. They're allowing individuals and companies to leverage technology to solve data problems. To anyone who's interested to solve data problems, I highly encourage you to reach out. I highly encourage you to create a one-on-one conversation with me where we can chat further about the specific ideas you have in mind, right? There's just so many ways to go about solving industry problems. It's not a question of what technology is best. It's a question of what should I do? What do I envision, right? And if you have a vision for using AI technology, I highly encourage you to reach out. I want to also recap this live stream by concluding with that this is a daily live stream where we discuss how to use AI technologies to really change how industries operate. I want to thank everyone who has joined us so far. I want to emphasize that if you're interested to continue this discussion, feel free to join me tomorrow, same time, that's 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we will continue the discussion on the next topic. And tomorrow's topic will be about how anyone can solve the manufacturing problems using AI technologies. So thank you everyone for joining us. I want to highlight a few comments. I want to thank everyone who joined us, who has stuck with us for this duration. And I want to conclude with that. If you're interested to subscribe to additional live streams, feel free to go to produvia.com/subscribe. And if you're interested to have a one-on-one conversation with me about how you can apply AI technology to solve food and beverage problems, I encourage you to schedule a discovery call. And you can do that by going to produvia.com/start. Thank you everyone for joining us, and everyone who is with us. I definitely want to conclude this live stream. So again, thanks again. I think I'm rambling. I will see you all tomorrow.